The little girl stood just inches from the towering glass doors, her breath fogging the cold surface in soft, trembling clouds that disappeared as quickly as they formed. She was so small against the massive building that it looked as if the city itself might swallow her, yet she didn't step back. Inside, the marble floors reflected bright lights and moving feet, polished shoes, hurried strides, important faces that never once looked down. She hugged her worn backpack tighter to her chest like a shield, feeling the frayed fabric against her fingers, feeling the faint warmth of the only thing that still belonged to her. Her eyes followed strangers as they passed through the revolving doors, laughing, talking, checking phones, living lives that felt impossibly distant. A shiver crawled up her arms as a cool draft slipped through the entrance, and she leaned her forehead gently against the glass, closing her eyes. "Mommy, please don't collapse today," she whispered, so softly it almost felt like a thought. In her mind, she saw her mother's pale face, the way she forced a smile in the mornings even while her hands trembled tying her daughter's shoes. Fear tightened in the little girl's chest as the city roared around her. Horns, footsteps, voices. But all she could hear was the fragile rhythm of her own heartbeat, counting time, praying it would carry her mother through just one more day. On the upper floor, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of paper, ink, and recycled office air that never seemed fresh. Her mother gripped the edge of the desk for just a second too long, the world tilting slightly beneath her feet. A sharp wave of dizziness rolled through her, blurring lines and faces. And for a terrifying moment, she thought this was it. This was the moment her body would finally betray her in front of everyone. She swallowed hard, forcing the room back into focus, forcing her knees to lock, her back to straighten. A dry cough burned in her chest, muffled behind the back of her hand as she turned away from curious glances. The folders in her arms felt heavier than they should have, as if each one contained not just documents but fear, rent money, medicines she couldn't afford, meals she had skipped so her child could eat. Sweat beaded along her hairline, sliding slowly down her temple, but she wiped it away quickly, hoping no one noticed. When a coworker passed, she summoned a fragile smile, the kind practiced in mirrors at home, the kind that hid pain behind politeness. Inside, panic and exhaustion clawed at her ribs, begging her to sit, to rest, to give in. But in her mind rose the image of a little girl with wide, hopeful eyes and a backpack too big for her shoulders, waiting outside a building that felt like a fortress. That picture pushed her forward, step after shaky step as she stacked files, typed with fingers that trembled, and whispered to herself between breaths, "Just hold on. Just a little longer." In the lobby, everything seemed to keep moving except him. The CEO halted mid-step, surrounded by the echo of footsteps, and the low murmur of conversations that suddenly sounded distant, muted, unreal. His eyes dropped, drawn down by a quiet presence he might have missed if she hadn't gathered the courage to step in front of him. The little girl stood there, barely reaching his waist, her small fingers tangled in the straps of her backpack, her gaze lifted with a mixture of fear and hope that struck him harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. For a second, he couldn't speak. He wasn't used to children in this world of glass and steel. He wasn't used to anyone looking at him like he was a lifeline instead of an authority. "Sir?" Her voice was thin, almost lost beneath the hum of the building, but it carried a weight that anchored him where he stood. "My mommy is very sick, but she still comes to work." A tremor ran through her words, and she looked down, gathering strength as if the sentence itself was too heavy to hold. She said, "If she rests, we won't have a home." Something inside his chest tightened, sharp and unexpected. He followed the direction of her tiny, shaking finger pointing upward toward the endless rows of windows. Behind those walls of glass was an invisible struggle, a woman standing when she should have been lying down, choosing pain over poverty, choosing work over weakness. The image slammed into memories he had buried long ago. A mother at a kitchen table, rubbing her temples, pretending she wasn't sick so her son wouldn't worry. His jaw clenched, breaths turning slow and controlled, as emotion crept into the edges of his polished composure. The girl waited, silent now, eyes shining, searching his face for an answer before he had even given one. And in that moment, everything he thought mattered. Profits, meetings, power, faded, replaced by a single, burning certainty surging through him like a command. This would not continue. The lobby lights seemed harsher now, reflecting off the polished floors as if exposing something raw that had long been hidden beneath wealth and routine. He straightened slowly, but his eyes never left the child. She stood frozen in front of him, her small shoulders slightly hunched, the weight of her confession hanging in the air between them. He could see the fear in her face, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, constant fear of a child who had already learned too much about the world, the kind that lives in the eyes and never quite goes away. He glanced again toward the elevators, toward the endless floors above where work continued as usual, unaware that a life was unraveling somewhere behind a desk. In his mind, he saw it clearly now. The woman forcing herself upright, willing her body to obey, ignoring the warning signs that her body was giving her. The thought made his hands curl slowly into fists. How many times had he walked these halls and never noticed? How many exhausted people had he passed without seeing them at all? A low, steady anger stirred beneath his calm exterior. Not at the woman, not at the girl, but at the system, at the silence, at himself for being blind for so long. He exhaled slowly, then crouched down in front of the little girl so they were at the same level, his expensive suit brushing against the marble floor without a second thought. His voice softened, but there was something unshakable in it now. "What's your mommy's name?" he asked gently. She answered in a whisper, eyes wide, as if afraid even saying it might make her disappear. He nodded once, engraving it into his mind forever. In that single nod, a decision was made. Not one for a meeting. Not for the company, but for a life. "Stay right here," he said quietly, rising back to his full height. The softness in his eyes hardened into resolve as he turned toward the elevators. Each step he took echoed through the lobby like a warning bell, urgency building with every stride. As the world around him blurred into the background and only one thing remained clear, he was not going to let that woman fall. Inside the elevator, the air felt tight, compressed by more than just steel walls. The quiet hum as the doors slid shut sounded louder than it should have, and the climb upward felt painfully slow. With each passing floor number, his heart beat harder, an unfamiliar urgency pounding beneath his tailored suit. He stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls. A composed, powerful man on the outside, yet behind his eyes there was a storm. He kept seeing the child's trembling hands, hearing the way her voice wavered on the word sick, and it burned into him deeper than any contract ever had. The doors opened to the floor the girl had pointed to. Everything looked normal at first. Desks neatly arranged, phones ringing softly, keyboards clicking, coworkers moving in orderly quiet, a world functioning exactly as it was designed to. And then he saw her. She stood near a desk piled with files, one hand gripping the edge as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the office lights, lips pressed tightly together as she forced herself to breathe evenly. For a moment their eyes met. Shock flickered in hers, confusion, fear, as if she already knew she'd been discovered. Her vision blurred again, the room tilting just slightly. She swayed, barely noticeable to anyone else, but he saw it. Every tiny sign of her struggle was suddenly screaming at him. He crossed the room in long, determined strides, the quiet murmur of the office fading behind him. Stopping in front of her, he spoke her name gently but firmly, anchoring her before she could fall. "You don't need to do this anymore," he said, voice low, filled with a gravity that silenced the space around them. In that instant, the weight she had carried alone for so long seemed to finally break, and the moment hung suspended in the air, fragile and powerful, and as hope, shock, and relief collided in her eyes, and the story found its breath in a single life-changing pause. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat and dissolved into a shallow, broken breath. The world narrowed to a dull ringing in her ears as the edges of the room darkened, her fingers loosening around the stack of files she had been forcing herself to hold. They slipped from her hands one by one, then all at once, paper fluttering down like wounded birds. As her knees buckled, a quiet panic flickered through her, not for herself, but for the little girl waiting below, the one reason she had stood for this long. Strong arms caught her before the floor could, steady and warm, pulling her back from the edge of nothingness. The office froze. Gasps filled the air, chairs scraping, voices blurring into a distant echo, but she barely heard any of it. Her head fell against his chest, her body completely spent, too tired to pretend anymore. In that fragile moment, the world of pressure and deadlines disappeared, and all that remained was a single, painful thought beating weakly in her mind. "Please don't let my daughter be alone." "I know," he whispered close to her ear as she trembled in his arms. his grip firm but gentle, as if holding something precious instead of a co-worker he had only just noticed. She's safe. And so are you. The words were more than comfort. They were a promise, placed with authority and something deeper, something human. Around them, the office had gone completely still. Faces watched in shock as the unshakable CEO, the man known for steel and silence, cradled a sick woman without hesitation. He lifted his head and his voice changed, rising with quiet power that sliced through the frozen air. Call a doctor now, clear this floor. People moved instantly, startled into action, phones pressed to ears, pathways opening as someone rushed to his side. He didn't let go of her, didn't step away even as chaos began to swirl around them. His eyes searched her face, pale and fragile, and then, for just a moment, he looked toward the elevator, as if he could see through floors and ceilings to the tiny figure waiting below. A little girl stood alone in the lobby, staring at the glowing numbers above the elevator doors. Each passing second felt like a lifetime. Then the doors slid open. She didn't see her mother yet, but she saw him, and in his eyes, she saw the answer to her whisper. Hope. Real, undeniable hope. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said everything without words. And in that quiet exchange, without speeches, without noise, the story found its ending not in collapse or loss, but in the fragile, powerful moment where help finally arrived, and a child's fear was gently replaced by the promise that everything was going to be okay.